Everything I build here feels hollow. The floor is falling through. Don't know which pathway to follow. My heart is split in two. Was it even love that we wanted? The day that we began. Just when we think that we found it, it slips away again. I wanna be there for you, there for you. 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 You touch me once like you mean to, and tell me not to go. All that I want is to feel you, breaking this heart of stone. I wanna be there for you, there for you. 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 I may not wake up feeling flawless, and my emotions can be reckless. Yeah, and I know I ain't perfect, but I glow, I say that but that. You're the only one who saw beyond my skin deep and into my heart completely. You got me cut like a diamond. All of the stars are aligning. My heart it beats like a lion. 'Cause every time you hold me and tell me that you love me, you got me cut like a diamond. The difference in me is so drastic. From day to night it's automatic. Oh, I don't know who I'd be without you. But I glow, it's not a question. You're the only one who saw beyond my skin deep and into my heart completely. You got me cut like a diamond. All of the stars are aligning.
All right. Hello. Welcome to those of you in the building, and welcome to those of you joining us online. Man, today we have a treat. My name is RJ, and I am one of the associate pastors here on the Discipleship and Teaching Ministry. And man, we are going to do something today that I've been anxiously awaiting for the past 2 weeks. We are going to hear from Miss Shanti Feldhahn. She is a nationally known Harvard graduate, former Wall Street analyst who devoted her life to helping marriages and relationships transform. And today, if you're in the building, if you're watching online and you know that your marriage or your relationship is in desperate need of some help, man, it is my prayer, it is my heart that you would listen today anxiously, because I believe that there'll be something that's said that will be helpful. Last thing I want us to know is that we will have the opportunity in this room today, you and I, we will have the opportunity to help and support Shanti as she works on her next book. And it's about a little bone chicka bone wong. It's about intimacy. And so today we will be participating in some research for her for 10 minutes. And so at the end, I'll remind you, but for 10 minutes, please, we'll take the time to do that survey, and we'll ask some questions at the end of her, all right? So please, with a heartfelt welcome, please, Miss Shanti Feldhahn, clap your hands.
Thank you, Pastor. So kind of you. Hey, you guys braved to come here in person at the end of the school year. And those of you listening online, I forgive you. It's okay. I know, believe me, with kids myself, and my son is taking his final exam tomorrow, everything gets a little bit crazy. So thank you guys truly for being here. And thank you guys who are joining us online. I have been looking forward to this for a while, since we have personal friends who are at the church, the LaFew family, and Eileen, who is here somewhere, and Brett, Eileen, who works with me. So I'm super excited about this. Now, let me just dive in and tell you that essentially everything that we're going to be talking about today is based on the last 17 years of research projects that we've done. And yet, my background, I didn't start out as a researcher. And so let me just tell you briefly how we kind of got into this. And some of you have probably done my For Women Only, For Men Only studies and have heard some of this before. And I hope you're okay if I repeat some of that. For those of you who haven't, thank you. I'm getting nods. I appreciate that. Because I actually, as Pastor was talking about, I started out actually as an analyst on Wall Street, completely different background. And when my husband and I moved from New York to here in Atlanta, this whole thing started because I had this bizarre opportunity, it would take too long to explain, but this crazy opportunity to write a couple of novels. And this whole research world started because one of the main characters in this novel that I was writing, one of the main characters was a man. And I realized I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head. Right? I'm a girl. What do I know about what a guy is going to be thinking? And really, honestly, in the book, there were some really kind of personal situations. And so, I would think, okay, I've got to figure out how to put thoughts in this man's head. I couldn't just say what he was doing. He's my main character. I had to say what he was thinking. And so I would ask Jeff, my husband, or we'd be out to dinner, with another couple. And I'd go to the other guy and I'd say, so can I interview you? And, the guy would be like, sure, and I'd say, okay, here's the scene in the book. Here's the scene in this sort of fictional story. What would you be thinking if this was you in a situation? I'm pretty sure I tagged Roy. And it was fascinating as all of the guys that I was talking to started explaining what they would be thinking, or it was even a little more removed than that because they could be really honest, because it wasn't really them, it was this character. Here's what the character would be thinking. But I found myself, honestly, really kind of shocked at some of the things these men were saying. And as these men started telling me what, they or a guy would really be thinking, I'm kind of like, are you serious? And why have I not heard this before? We've been married maybe 6-7 years at that point. And so why am I just learning this now? And Jeff, my husband, he was shocked that I was shocked. Because I would come home from the latest round of interviews because I need to explain, this got me started. And I'm like, okay, there's clearly something here. And so pretty soon I'm going up to the guys behind the counter at Starbucks, right? And I'm like, what would you be thinking? And as I would come home and explain to Jeff, I'm like, guess what this guy said? Jeff told me later that he'd be thinking, he'd be nodding and going, yeah, interesting. And inside, he's thinking, what about this did you not get before? Right? So surprised that I was surprised. And we started to realize there was something really fundamental going on. We started to realize that this kind of funny situation, what we were hearing and what I was hearing as I was talking to these men, it wasn't just that it was surprising. What I was hearing from the men was incredibly foundational stuff. These weren't these things that were shocking me, these weren't things that the men said, I kind of think this, or it kind of happens once every couple of months, it comes up. These were things these men were describing that they thought or they felt every day, multiple times a day. And that is that revelation, that realization that there was something really important here. And very quickly, God had just set it up. And very quickly, suddenly the doors just started opening in front of us for me to turn this into a nationally representative survey of men and a study of men. And ended up becoming, some of you are familiar with it because I know you've done the study, for women only, about the inner lives of men, which just exploded very unexpectedly and ended up being able to then fund the next study and the next one and the next one. And so over now it has been 17 years, I think, now. And over these years, we have now had the chance to interview and survey now 35,000 men and women. And this next study, we're probably gonna get close to another 4,000 or 5,000 on the study that we're in the middle of right now. And we've spent a lot of money, more than $750,000 on the research in order to be able to get really good, rigorous data. And because of that, everything I'm gonna share here tonight, this is not my opinion. Usually, honestly, it contradicted my opinion because it was pretty surprising. So what I'm gonna do with all of this research, one of the things I really enjoy doing is distilling down what are kind of the most crucial things that we have found that have the most benefit for relationships. The way that we put it is essentially we're focusing on me and my team, like Eileen. What we're focusing on primarily is not trying to cover the waterfront of whatever matters the most in marriage. If any of you ask me a question that's like a counseling-oriented question, how do I handle conflict management? I'm gonna be like, let me do a 2-year study and I'll get back to you. I have no idea. But in the areas that we have found make a difference, the key is, what is it that is the most high leverage? What is it that if there is a little thing that you just change this or you just knew that it has this outsized impact? What are those crucial things? And so I want to download what I think are basically the top 5 that we've seen over the years. And to some degree, this is a little arbitrary because there's probably more like the top 10 that really matter the most, but I'm picking what I think are probably the top 5 based on the research as we see it now. Now, by the way, really crucial for me to mention, I'm making generalizations here. There are always going to be exceptions. Just so you know that from the start, one of the things that's really crucial to recognize, for example, if I'm talking about something that we found in general that men think, for example, if 75% of men said one way, by definition, 25% didn't, right? Everybody's an individual. The key is to use this as a starting point, to talk to your spouse and say, does this apply to you? Is this really how you think? Or with this particular habit that Shanti says matters, would that make a difference for us? So let me just start downloading what some of those things are. And then we'll have a chance to do the survey. And then after that, I think we're gonna, for the people here in the room, do some Q&A, if that's right, Pastor? Okay. So big picture, the first and the most important kind of starting point, the first of those 5 things that just give me a lot of hope, is that what we have found overwhelmingly is that when you're getting into tensions in your marriage, whether that's big tensions or little day-to-day stuff that like just hurts each other's feelings, it turns out that the vast majority of those things are not caused by big, hard to solve problems. Those do exist, but the majority of the issues in marriage don't come from those. They don't come from, for example, that somebody was sexually abused as a child and they have a lot to work through. That happens, but that usually doesn't cause the majority of issues, or that somebody has an addiction or whatever those issues are. It turns out that normally you have a husband and a wife who really care about each other, usually. Really, really care. And they are both trying really hard. And because they don't recognize some of these things that we're going to be talking about or have wrong assumptions about the other person or whatever the issue may be, they're trying hard and kind of in the wrong areas and sort of missing each other really, and not making each other feel cared for in the way that you think you should feel cared for after all my hard work to make you feel cared for, and are sort of missing it, or worse, trying really hard and actually hurting each other's feelings and not intending to, and not even realizing that that's what's happening. And so what we have found is that all the other stuff I'm going to be sharing and all the other stuff that's been in the books over the years is that once you kind of flip the switch on some of the assumptions and some of these little pieces of new knowledge, you're trying hard, but in the right areas. And it just makes so much difference. And by the way, I am guinea pig number 1 on this. Remember, I am not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. Jeff and I talk about the fact that truly we are the biggest boneheads ever. And I mean, Roy and Terry can back me up on that. We really are. I think there have been occasions when we've been out to dinner with Roy and Terry and gotten into a spat with me and Jeff, and Terry has leaned over and said, Shanti, there's this book you should read. Shut up. So it truly, this is one of these areas where we are just as much guinea pigs as anyone, and yet we have found in our marriage as well that understanding these little things that can make a really big difference, it can be truly game-changing. And to mention those big issues, let me just close the loop. Those big issues may still be out there, right? That may be a reality in your marriage and whatever you're dealing with. Understanding these little things isn't going to solve those big things, but it will make them easier to solve because you're going to be so much more close, and there's going to be other factors that give you all even more goodwill to be able to work towards those. Okay, so bottom line for you to be aware of as you go, sort of what's the to-do on this one? The key starting point is to realize when you're having a conflict, when you're having tension, realize that the problem really isn't the problem, right? There's something underneath it. There's something else going on. And learn to look for what that something else is. And I'll give you a few examples of that as we go. Okay, second truth. So that's sort of the first big picture truth. Second thing that I think is really, really crucial as a starting point is to realize that the key to happiness in marriage and the key to really having this abundant, joyful, close, oneness relationship in marriage, it isn't dependent on what your spouse is doing. It is very dependent on what you believe about what your spouse is doing. It turns out that when we did the study of the most happily married couples, which I thought I had that book up here and I don't. Looks like I have 2 copies of For Women Only instead. But one of our books is called The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages. And we did this big study. It was so fun. We did this study of the most happily married couples and what they're doing differently. And it was really fascinating to see that even people in very good marriages are actually doing things a little bit differently than the people who, we call these the highly happy couples, where in a survey, independent of each other, where the husband and wife would never know what the other person said, if the husband and the wife both chose independently and anonymously the highest end of the happiness scale, so to speak, those were the couples that I most wanted to study. And we called those the highly happy couples. And it turns out that they have a lot to teach us about what are some of those habits that are day-to-day little things that we don't realize matter. And often the happiest couples didn't even realize mattered. And yet we saw it in the data. They wouldn't have been able to identify it, but it came out like a spotlight in the data. And one of the factors that matters the most is that the happiest couples are far more likely to believe the best of their spouse's intentions towards them, even when they're legitimately hurt. Everybody gets hurt. Even the most happily married couples hurt each other's feelings, right? We're all trying hard and accidentally hurting each other, and the happiest couples are absolutely no exception to that. That still happens. The key difference is what they believe about their spouse's intentions. Because our natural human tendency, if Jeff hurts my feelings, my natural tendency is to kind of go, ow. And subconsciously, I kind of think to myself, he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway, right? And I don't realize that when I'm thinking that, I don't realize I'm thinking he doesn't care about me. That's what that translates to. He knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway. He doesn't care about me. The happiest couples flipped that. And sometimes it was purposeful, like they tried to, and sometimes it had become so purposeful and become such a habit that it eventually became automatic, where there was still the ow, but no, I know my husband loves me. I know he does. I know he cares about me, so he must not have known how that would make me feel, or he wouldn't have said it. It's a complete switch. Often in a guy's mind, the feeling, the ow, is nothing I do is ever good enough for her, right? That's kind of the feeling that sometimes comes up in a guy, and obviously there's some generalizations here, but the men were far more likely to go, no, I know she cares about me. I know she appreciates me, so she must not have known how that would come across, or she wouldn't have said it that way. And that one factor, that one habit, has this unbelievable power to transform relationships. And by the way, just so you know, this isn't wishful thinking. What we actually found on the survey is that and this was so encouraging, the vast majority of couples, even in really actually distressed relationships, which I wasn't necessarily expecting when we saw the data come in, even in really distressed relationships, the vast majority of people care still about their spouse, even if they're like really unhappy and they've had serious marriage issues. The number was something like 99.26 something percent of people deeply care. We're in the current research project that Pastor was talking about earlier. We're doing this with a co-author because of the topic, needing to be pretty careful about how we handle this. And he is a nationally recognized therapist, especially in this area of intimacy, but in general, in marriage. And he has been practicing, he's a pastor, and he's a PhD therapist, and he's been practicing for, I want to say 35 years almost, something like that. And we, in one of our very earliest meetings with him, we were talking about how to put a sort of bones to this concept of whether somebody believes the best or not. He said, you have to ask yourself, if you're having an issue in your marriage, is this a bad heart on my spouse's part or bad skill? And he said, almost always, it's bad skill. The other person doesn't realize how they're coming across, whatever it is. And we said, okay, let's put some numbers to this. So you've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of clients over the years. And you've mentored others. He's a professor in one of the big graduate school programs in this area. So in terms of breaking down, how many people have you seen, over the years who you say, yeah, it probably is a bad heart. Like that really is. They just don't care about their spouse. And he kind of thought, and he was going through some numbers and he's thinking for a minute. And we said, take your time, And so after a few minutes, he came back and he said, I think, we had all these percentages and numbers on the board. And he said, I think in that spot, I think it's about 6-ish. And I said, okay, so 6%, that was higher than I thought it was. He said, about 6, and I said, 6%, and I wrote it down. He's like, no, 6 people. In 35 years. In a counseling practice, dealing with the most difficult situations. And that gives you a sense. We almost all care about each other. In order to have a happy relationship, you have to let yourself believe that your spouse cares about you. Let me give you a quick example of this. This is kind of just how this works on a sort of a day-to-day example. So one of the couples that we were interviewing as part of the Happy Marriages study they were one of the highly happy couples. And they told us a story about something that had actually happened a week before, something like that. And the wife was pregnant with their first child. And they had been married for quite a few years before they were able to have children. So they were slightly on the older side. And they were both foodies. They both loved restaurants, they loved great food, but they lived in an area that was a little more of a rural area, kind of a bit away from the nearest big city. And so that was like the thing that they would do. They would go into the city for these really nice dinners because they were both foodies. And now she gets pregnant, and they're thinking, it's going to be hard for us to get there. Well, then, suddenly, a really well-known chef started this bed and breakfast / restaurant that was coming into their area. And the whole time they're building it, they realize this is actually going to open before the baby comes. And so this is going to be like, let's get on the reservation list, because you had to get on the reservation list like months in advance. Let's get on the list, and then this will be our last like big romantic dinner before the baby comes and our lives change forever, right? And so as they were driving past this place as it was being built, they were all excited, and they were like, 2 more months, 3 more weeks, 2 more days, until their big night. Well, the night of the big reservation comes, the big dinner comes, and the husband takes a client call at 6 o'clock and misses the reservation. Yeah, all the men in here are like, oh. And he, of course, is so upset. And she is like sitting there at the restaurant. She's in tears. She's upset. And he comes running in, like his face is white. He's all wet because it's raining outside. And when I said, how did you handle that? What happened? Because I'm literally trying to figure out what the happiest couples do differently. I'm thinking how I would have handled that is, right? And instead, what she said was, I'm so disappointed, because of course, you have to be able to say, I'm so disappointed. What happened? And she's assuming there's a reason that this happened. There has to be, because she said initially, she was thinking, before he walked in, she was initially thinking, he's like going to be spending all his time at work now that there's is this what my life is going to be now that we're going to have a baby, and he's going to be working all the time and getting stressed about earning enough money, and we're not going to see each other, and her mind went in all these directions. I'm going to be a single mom. And instead, she pulled her thoughts back and she said, I told myself, no, he was just as excited as I was. He was saying 3 more weeks also. So there has to be another explanation. If you're taking notes, write that one down. Because the happiest couples, they switch it and they think there has to be another explanation other than he doesn't care about me or she doesn't appreciate me. And so that mental process is what allowed her, by the time he ran in the door with his face all white, that process is what allowed her to approach it like, I'm so disappointed, what happened? As opposed to, I can't believe you did this, you don't care about me, blah, blah, blah. And he was able then to lower his defenses, because he was like he was all defensive. It lowered his defenses, and he was able to share, and she was able to hear that in his case, what had happened was that he was about to leave, and the client rang through on his office phone, and he turned his head, and his boss is standing like right behind him. And he's like, I felt like I had to take this call because I can't afford to be on anybody's question mark list for like job security. I've got a wife and now a baby coming. And now you can talk about the fact that maybe he should have handled it differently. Like, hey, Bob, can I call you back from my cell phone on the road? Like, you can talk about maybe he should have handled it differently, but the key is his intentions towards her were good, not bad. And that her choice to approach it in that way, with that assumption, saved their happiness rather than hurting it. That one factor, let me just tell you, I've spent a lot of time on this, but that one factor will change everything if you make that mental switch. Okay, need to move on. The third factor, the third truth that I want to mention, the little thing that makes a big difference, is a lot of what we talk about in For Women Only and For Men Only, and I know some of you have gone through those DVD courses. Do we even have DVDs anymore? Like streaming courses? Anyway, have gone through the video course. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I want to just give you the highlights. One of the key factors that we have seen over and over statistically that becomes one of the biggest issues in relationships for either negative or for positive, for either bad or for good in a relationship, is recognizing that it tends to be that men and women tend, not always, but tend to have 2 different sets of primary insecurities running under the surface. And as a result, 2 different sets of self-doubt, 2 different worries and fears. And as a result, we tend to have 2 different needs, 2 different things that just light us up. If this is true, if it is true that men and women do tend to have these different insecurities, by definition, what that means is that something different is gonna hurt your spouse's feelings than would hurt yours. That's what that means. And we have to recognize what some of those things are, because we don't recognize when we're trying hard and we're hurting the other person's feelings. Really often, it's because our spouse has kind of a raw nerve in an area that we're jabbing at, and we don't realize it, and we certainly would never intend to at all. And so briefly, what are these two different sets of insecurities and needs as a result? And just remember, this is a perfect example of where there are generalizations here, and I'm making generalizations, and there are always exceptions. In general, what I'm about to say, depending on the survey and depending on the sample and the demographics of the different groups, it tends to be about 75 to 85% of women or 75 to 85% of men, depending on which survey we're talking about. But that means there is that exception. So here's the bottom line. Let me start with women first, just briefly. For us women, the question, the insecurity in our heart tends to be kind of, if you just want to say it baldly, it's basically, am I lovable? Am I special? Am I beautiful? Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? That's underneath the surface in so many women. And so as a result, the need that comes out of that is to feel loved, right? And cherished and adored. That's what lights us as women up. That's kind of what we think is the whole point of having the relationship to begin with, right? Because if you're not gonna feel loved in your relationship, sort of, what's the point of having it? And it's a big surprise for us to find out that for men, that's not actually the point at all for most men. And the men in general on all these surveys, their question was more, am I able? Am I adequate? Do I measure up? Do I have what it takes? Essentially, am I any good at what I do on the outside? Totally different. Am I worthy of being loved for who I am on the inside? Am I any good at what I do on the outside? Very different. So it lends itself to a very different set of primary needs. The men on my survey said if they had to make a choice, and by the way, nobody would want to have to make this choice. But the men on the survey said, if I have to make a choice, I would choose, this was 74% of men, said if I had to make a choice, I would actually choose to give up feeling that my wife loved me. I would choose to give it up if I had to, if I could just feel that she appreciated me and that she respected me and kind of that she believed in me and admired me and trusted me. All of those things, to the women in the room and listening, all those things are more important to the average man even than feeling that his wife loves him. That's a big difference it tends to be between men and women, and it gets us as women into kind of a sticky situation sometimes because we women are actually really good at showing love. Like it comes out of us naturally to say, I love you. And yet at the same time, like if we're telling our husband, and this, by the way, this doesn't just apply to our husband. Like, how many women in the room have a son? Nobody? Okay, I know you do, okay. Or how many of you, ladies, how many of you work with men in some way, okay? Yeah, men are everywhere. Like, this applies to a lot of different environments. And we don't realize that, like with a husband, for example, or a boyfriend or son, like we can say, honey, I love you. We can We can try to do things that we hope that this person will find to be loving, and at the same time, we might be criticizing him a lot. Or like questioning his decisions all the time. Or, I don't know, telling him what to do every now and then. Okay, some of the men, by the way, are looking alarmed, like I cannot nod because I will get in trouble if I nod. But we do, and I do this too, ladies. You know, I said I'm guinea pig number one. Literally, 2 weekends ago, my husband and I are flying to Pennsylvania to do a big event there. And we're in the Atlanta airport parking lot with a bunch of boxes of books and suitcases and trying to put everything onto a cart. And I start telling my husband how to pack the cart. And he starts just shutting down. And I'm like, I am literally gonna be on stage talking about this in like 6 hours. And it doesn't come naturally to me, and I wrote the stupid book, right? So the key is just to use this as a starting point. Now, let's come back to the actual facts, the actual information for a minute. Start by the recognition that your spouse has this different insecurity. Ladies, for your husband, this means, by definition, if this is true of him, which it won't be of everybody, he looks very confident in himself, he looks so strong, and on the inside, there is so much more self-doubt than you realize. And this feeling of, am I any good at what I do? Like, I really wanna be a good husband for her. I really wanna be a great dad. I really wanna be a great salesman or, whatever he does for a living. But I'm really not sure. Like, am I any good? And he's looking to you for signals constantly, subconsciously a lot of the time, for whether you think he's good at what he does. So and this is the silliest example, but it's the silly examples that tend to cause these issues. When he does the dishes and puts the dishes in the dishwasher, and you come along behind him and put them in the dishwasher the right way, sorry, didn't mean to hit a nerve over there. When you come along behind him and correct it, put him in the right way, you're trying to help. And you have no idea that you have just told him, oh yeah, what you did on the outside, it wasn't good enough, you failed. And it's actually a really kind of painful feeling, which we as women give no credibility to whatsoever because we think you are so oversensitive that should not bother you. And finally, I thought that over and over and over as I was hearing these men talk about it, and finally I realized, wait a minute, the reason I'm saying that should not bother you is that it wouldn't bother me. He's so different in some ways. And he's wired also very differently on purpose by a God who knew what he was doing. And I need to honor that and respond. And ladies, here's the key. Respond to the inner man, not that outer one that looks so strong. Respond to that tender heart inside. The key isn't just avoiding hitting that painful nerve, by the way, and recognizing that there's an insecurity there that you don't realize, a vulnerability. The key is also building your man up in this area that he questions himself constantly. You don't realize it, but he really is. And one of the best ways of doing that, it sounds so simple, it's literally to say thank you. We did that eventually. It took us a long time. I don't have time to go into the story, but we ended up doing a big investigation to try to find out what's a man's equivalent of I love you. Because for us, I love you speaks to our insecurity as a woman. Am I lovable, right? It speaks directly to it. But to a man, saying I love you is very sweet and nice, but it doesn't have the same emotional power, it turns out. It turns out the words thank you do have that emotional power. Why? Why is that, and the thank you for the little things, like thank you for noticing that the light bulb's out and changing them, that was driving me nuts, or thanks for playing with the kids when you were so tired. those kinds of things. Why does that have such power? It's because it says to him, I noticed that thing you did on the outside. I noticed it to begin with, which we often, hate to say it, we often do, but we don't say anything about it. So it says, I noticed that thing you did on the outside, and it was good, and I appreciate it. And it just fills men up. Now, not 100%, there was like 87% or 89% of men. Not 100%, but most. Just try it. Men, on your side, what is it that's the little high leverage thing you don't realize? Because for you, it's not a surprise that your wife needs to feel loved. Men know women need to feel loved. What you may not realize is how easy it is for her to not feel loved. You may not realize that she looks so put together and she's beautiful and you love her so much and you want so much to make her happy. And you don't realize that there are things that trigger that question of, am I lovable? Because in marriage, you assume that question goes away. For you, when you get married, it does kind of go away for most men. You don't question, does she love me? Like, it just doesn't come up. And you don't realize that for her, there is no switch in a woman's brain that gets flipped to the, oh, now I feel permanently loved position. Okay, that switch doesn't happen. And instead, it just morphs, that question morphs to, it is still, am I lovable? But it's now, does he really love me? Is he glad he married me? Would he choose me all over again? That's a subconscious question, but it is very real. I think it was 82% of women have that. And it's running under the surface. And when it's triggered by conflict or you having a bad day and you've got the black cloud of doom following you around the house and you're grumpy, you don't realize that it's her question is now triggered. And as you have that argument over breakfast and you're like, look, I gotta get to work. I gotta get, to the office, and you drive away. In your mind as a guy, often what happens to the idea of that conflict? Guys, it disappears. Yes, it's just gone. Ladies, is it gone? All the women are shaking their heads. No, because what's happened is that question, which was underground, has now risen up, and it's kind of going, and it feels like, are we okay? And that question is going to circle until she's reassured. So guys, here's the key. You can address that if it's happened by, before you drive away for work, recognize she's going to have that kind of feeling. And you can solve it temporarily by just saying, look, I got to get to work. We're not in a good place right this minute, but listen, I'm angry, but it's okay. I want you to know we're okay. That will tell her, this is just an argument. I love you. We'll work this out tonight. And it allows her to be reassured and to relax. But guys, by the way, you can prevent that feeling from being triggered to begin with, actually. There's a way to prevent it, where even if you have the argument over breakfast and drive away, she doesn't have that feeling rise up because you've created such a sense of security under the surface in her, in your relationship. And literally, you can do that by daily pursuit. And I know whenever Jeff and I do marriage conferences all the time, and whenever we say, guys, it's a matter of pursuit, the men are like, what? Like, what do you mean? And think of it as what you did when you were dating, that kind of sense of, I'm choosing you today. Now, I did have one guy who came up to us after we said that at one marriage conference. He was like, that was exhausting. Like, I got married so I could stop doing that stuff, right? Now, here's the thing though. Guys, you're thinking, when you think of that stuff that you did when you were dating, you're thinking of literally like the candlelight dinners you arranged and those kinds of events. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about an event of some kind. We're talking about a message that you sent her every day when you were dating and when you were trying to convince her to marry you. that message is, I'm choosing you today. Because remember, she has that question, does he love me today? I know that sounds crazy to you. Under the surface, that question is there every day, and she's looking for the answer to that every day. So you can literally send her that message, that pursuit message, by reaching across and taking her hand when you're walking across a parking lot. Like that says, I'm glad I married you today. That's what that says. And it helps build that sense of security in her so much, those messages every day, that when you do have the conflict, it isn't a question. It just isn't. So ask your wife if she is in this percentage where that matters. And if so, what are the things that make her feel secure in your love? Like literally, we heard so many simple things, not just taking the hand, but like when you're sitting at church, you're putting your arm around her in church, right? Like that says, you're mine, right? I'm glad I married you. Yeah, good job, by the way, yeah. Now, all the men in the room, by the way, are like, oh, too late. But here's the key, by the way. Ask her what those things are. And then, ladies, when he does those things, when he puts his arm around you or whatever, don't say, you were only doing that because she told you to, right? Because this is how he feels. Believe the best of his intentions. And guys, when she looks for things now and practices looking for things to say thank you for, and says, hey, thanks for getting the kids off to, the summer camp so that I could go to the meeting, don't kind of cynically roll your eyes and saying, you're only saying that because Shanti told you to. This is how she feels. Believe the best of her intentions towards you. This is how we feel towards each other. Remember, we just didn't know that these things mattered. And we didn't know what would hurt each other. So that's just, again, it's just a starting point. This is hopefully will help you get some conversations going to learn what matters to your spouse. All right, I need to move on. Truth number 4. I'm just gonna briefly touch on the last 2 here. Again, these are just gonna get you started. It turns out that one of the key issues that we also don't realize is that so often some of our daily tensions come because not only do we have different insecurities running under the surface and different needs as a result, we're not valuing what our spouse is valuing in certain areas, and we don't recognize it. And the biggest way that this comes out from what we can tell is when it comes to money. We literally, as a sort of research team, one of the things that I'd been puzzled for years is, why is money such a issue, right? Like, why is this one of those things that causes issues in marriage, kind of like intimacy, right? Like, why is that? And it turns out that one of the big factors under the surface is this one. And so let me just sort of give you a primer on it really briefly. It turns out when we're having issues around money, it turns out it is not about the money. When I would... This is, by the way, this is our last book, was called Thriving in Love and Money. I think we are nuts to be tackling money and sex back to back in our research. Like, seriously, we are absolutely nuts. But one of the things I had never understood that really I suddenly realized once we started doing the research is, why is it when I would, for example, I would call Jeff, long day of meetings, I would call him on the way home and say, honey, is it okay? I'm just gonna pick up some Chinese food for the family, the kids, and they're getting back from their activities and whatever. I'll just pick up some Chinese food on the way home for dinner. And if Jeff would go, I've got some chicken in the fridge from Costco. If you get the Chinese food, that's gonna be like $35, and why don't I just grill the chicken? Why does that bug me? And why does it bug him that I call and ask the question? Well, it turns out it's not about the $35. It turns out that when we have conflict over money, it's not about the money. It turns out it's about how money makes us feel and about how it makes our spouse feel. And there's this whole series of like expectations under the surface and beliefs about how money should work and insecurities and worries and fears. We don't even know we're there. And that is what it's usually about. So for example, the Chinese food, 2 different values, as an example, are, for me, we haven't like had any time as a family in like weeks. Like our daughter has volleyball and our son has track and we're running in a million different directions. And if we grill the chicken, which is really sweet of Jeff to offer, but if we grill the chicken, there's gonna be like the prep time and then the cooking time, and then after we eat it, there's gonna be all the cleanup, and then it's gonna be time for homework. So like $35 to buy this precious hour of family time, like no question, of course. Whereas for Jeff, he's thinking if we keep doing this, $35 every time we want Chinese food, we're gonna be homeless in retirement. Like that's kind of what's in his mind. I mean, I'm slightly overstating that, but that's kind of what's in his mind. And we don't realize that each of us, and this applies in every marriage, it turns out, in every single marriage, there are things that we really care about and we don't recognize for some weird reason. I am married to a different human being who cares about something different than I do, and these values that this person has may be completely legitimate. I would not handle money in this way at all. But their value is no more the right way of doing things than mine is, or the wrong way of doing things than mine is. My way is not my way or the highway. They're just 2 different values. Now, of course, there's some exceptions to this. Like if somebody has a gambling addiction, you would have 100 objective people who would look at that and say, that is objectively, there's a right and wrong there. It's not just a matter of a difference of opinion, difference of values. But if you had 100 objective people look at my value for the family time and paying the money for the family time versus Jeff's value of saving for retirement, that $35 for retirement, would that 100 objective people say that my way is right or wrong or Jeff's is right or wrong? Probably not. I would want them to agree with me, but probably not. And so the key is, just as a starting point, is to start recognizing that there isn't probably a right or wrong in this, it's just different. Now, by the way, I should mention, and this is probably gonna step on a couple of church toes, and like people who love Dave Ramsey kind of toes, and so I'm gonna apologize to begin with. But one of the things that we have seen is that in the church, statistically, people tend to just assume that saving is the right value and therefore spending is sort of the wrong value. Like it's just being the planner saver is kind of the right way. And everything else is a little bit like in our family, Jeff tends to be more the saver, I tend to be more the spender, and not like crazy, but those tend to be our lanes. And Jeff would confess to me when we started this project, he's like, I hate to say it, I just thought you had a character flaw. And so the savers tend to think that just is like, that's the biblical way, right? And of course, you can 100% point to ways that that's the biblical way, except is it the biblical way? What about all of Jesus' sayings that God has good gifts for his children that he wants us to enjoy? What about take no thought for tomorrow? God's gonna provide for you. What about the guy who stored up all of his treasure in barns and never got to enjoy it? You could make both of these cases, that there is truly a value here in all of these things. And the key is, what is God's calling for your family, for you to come together in oneness in order to decide that for your family. Okay, final note, because I think we're out of time. I just looked at the time. Let me mention that the fifth thing, which I don't have time to unpack it, but the fifth point that to me is incredibly high leverage is the absolute power of kindness in your marriage. We don't realize it, but sometimes, and more often than sometimes, we will treat our spouse in a way we would never treat a close friend. We don't recognize that we're doing it. We don't intend to. And we have to learn, what is true Christ-like kindness look like for me to be purposely focused on kindness to my spouse? And of course, to my children, to my in-laws, to the colleague that drives you nuts, right? There is a process that we tested, and it became one of our big projects. We don't have the books with us, but it's called the 30-Day Kindness Challenge. And if you are interested in exploring this, you can actually go to jointhekindnesschallenge.com. It'll tell you more about it. But here's the key starting point. If you want to have your eyes opened to all the ways that you are actually sabotaging your relationship and being unkind without intending to, again, not just your spouse, it could be your child or your in-laws or whatever. There's 3 things that you can do that make such a difference, and that's what the 30-Day Kindness Challenge is. You do these 3 things every day for 30 days. And the first thing is, you don't say anything negative about that person. You pick a person that you're doing this for, and you don't say anything negative about them, either to them or about them to somebody else. Because that last bit is often where we get in trouble. If I'm doing this for, like I did this for my daughter, 16-year-old daughter at the time. She's a great kid, but 16. And sometimes head wanted to explode. I didn't realize if I was polite to her, but behind the scenes, I went into my bedroom and closed the door and went to Jeff and went, ugh. I didn't realize I am sabotaging how I feel about her. You don't think about it that way, but that's what you're doing. So the first thing is nothing negative about the person. Second thing is every day find and say something you can praise about them, to them and about them, to somebody else. And the third thing is to do a little action of generosity for them, a little action of kindness. It is astounding how this improves any relationship, and it speaks to the miraculous power of kindness. God has created kindness as truly a supernatural fruit of the Spirit. It has the power not just to break down walls, it has the power to melt through those walls and really touch our hearts. And when we do this, it changes not just them, but us. So those are the 5 things that I would really encourage you just to look at. Ask God to show you, does this impact my relationship? Are there things that I can learn in this? Ask your spouse, what are those little things that would make a difference for them, for example? And be willing to be willing to implement what they tell you, because we have been given a lot of power in each other's lives. So thank you guys.
Wow. Shanti, listen, I've binge watched your YouTube videos and read some of your books, but that was so phenomenal. Thank you so much. On behalf of Pastor Michael, who wasn't able to be here today, and I know all of us in the building and those watching us online, that was so helpful.
Oh, thanks.
Very practical. And I know there are families in here, there are relationships in here that have some real tools to make their relationships better. And so, man, this was just phenomenal.
Thanks.
All right, so next, as I mentioned when we started, we have an opportunity to be helpful. You heard all the research. You heard how she just beautifully takes data and makes it practical to help families. Right now, we have the opportunity to participate in a research, national research study that she is doing to help people with intimacy. It's a very important topic, and we can help her in the next 10 minutes. There will be a QR code on the screen. Use your phones. For those of you online, the QR screen will be posted there. I'm going to pray for us now, okay? I'm going to pray for us now. We'll take the next 10 minutes or so and complete that, the study. But then after that, those of you in the building will take some time to ask some questions. Is that fair? Great. All right, so let's pray. Father God, thank you for this just beautiful opportunity, Lord, to learn about how we as spouses and those of us in relationship can better love one another, to speak one another's language. Lord, I just thank you for Shanti. I thank you for just the gift that you've given her to take data and make it practical. Lord, I just thank you for the precious nuggets of wisdom that were shared today. Let us cherish them. Let us use them in the way that transforms our lives. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. All right, go ahead. Do those studies.
I need to give some instructions.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and this is to everybody online as well. Oop, is my mic on? There we go. This is to everybody online because I'm seeing some alarmed looks on the faces. You are not going to be taking this survey about sex sitting next to your spouse. So if you're willing to participate, and everybody online, this is you too. I want everybody to stand up if you're willing to participate. And I want the men to move over to this side of the room. And I want the women to move over to this side of the room. And those of you online, if you are sitting snuggled up on the couch with your arm around each other, you're gonna have to move at least 10 feet away. Because the key is you have to be able to take this independently. You cannot compare notes and you can't be like worried about what my spouse will think about what I'm saying. You can talk about it all you want after you've pressed submit to this, to the survey. One other thing, we do have paper surveys for anybody in the room who prefers to take this on paper. If you do, raise your hand and Eileen and Brett will bring that over. It looks like we don't need anybody. We are good. Thank you guys. We are going to leave the QR code up for everybody online. Thanks for taking 10 minutes right now to participate online. Even though you're not physically in the room, if your spouse isn't with you, go ahead and do this. You will get an email from the church tonight, tomorrow morning, and just make sure, send it to your spouse so that they can complete this as well, because this is a survey of married couples.